For the next 40 or so minutes, I want to talk to you about a small, simple little problem or opportunity. The idea of running organizations with agility at enterprise speed, or at startup speed. Can't even read my own slides. The context of this conversation is really built around Atlassian's latest acquisition. So as of April 3rd, we have made a very bold statement and moved into the agile at scale space. Quick question. Does anybody know or remember the product known as AgileCraft? Quick show of hands. Anybody? Anybody? Okay, we don't count. There's at least one person, so that's good. The context for all of this journey for AgileCraft started more than 5 years ago. But for this particular slide set, we're particularly interested in what's happening next, or where are we now? So as this is an Atlassian conversation with our partners here from IT Economics, we're talking about how Jira Align, one of the latest acquisitions by Atlassian, and the addition of it to all the other great products that you know and love, what is that going to do for you and for your customers as you go on these journeys of connecting all of these products together, creating solutions to the problems that our organizations face? So we're talking more about not just where all of our bits and pieces or bytes sit together, but how they act in service of solving these problems that organizations face. The challenges of collaboration, for example, right at the top of the slide there. The challenges of how do we build up and coordinate the volume of work that we see in organizations that move at startup speed. So Atlassian is making a very clear and conscious move into the space of all of this scale, agility, enterprise connectedness. And I'll be here for the next 40 minutes or so to talk you through some of our thoughts in this process. Of course, a much bigger talk is happening after this. Dominic Price and Raj will be walking us through a very much bigger context of Atlassian's approach in this space. But I'll dip in and out of parts of what they'll talk about. So why are we all challenged by this need to go faster? And as the last talk probably mentioned, the need to go safer as well. Well, really it is this whole aspect that all companies are going through transformations. We hear a lot about, let's do a quick show of hands, digital transformations. Anybody doing a digital transformation? If any of you know what that actually means, feel free to let me know. So digital transformation, anything to do with taking your existing processes and making them work better in tools. But of course, remember the agile context. You want to do this for people, the thing on the left of the Agile Manifesto, more so than the tools. So it's not a digital transformation just because we love tools. And yes, Atlassian as a product company loves tools. But we also think about the cultural transformation. So is anybody going through a leadership transformation or a way of working transformation, doing different processes to get you to this type of speed or iteration? Much fewer show of hands. So the culture change that comes along with the last one at the end there, agile, or the digital transformation itself, is the people piece. It's the hardest part of this whole transformation. So over the course of this conversation, we'll be talking about, well, why are companies even going down this route if it is going to be so much more difficult? Can't we just stay the way we are? Isn't it easier just to do nothing? Well, no, because the amount of change that's happening in the environment is pushing us all in this direction. Two very simple numbers, innocuous, not very compelling. But if you dig into the information behind each of these numbers, and we start to tell a bit of a story. So you know the trend of transformation in all of the investment markets. You know that the pace of change, the organizations that were the leaders a few years ago are no longer the leaders now. Whole segments grow and disappear in blink of an eye. Well, in relative terms anyway. So we're looking at if 75% of the S&P 500, just one example of one of the markets that are out there, if that's going to churn over the course of the next, what year is it, 2020? 7 years. That's quite a lot of change. And for us to survive in that level of competition, we need to be able to be a bit more nimble, be a bit more creative, less tied down into the ways we do things. What about the second number on the right? Anybody want to take a guess what $251 gets us? Aside from not a lot. Well, really, this is a much bigger challenge. This is the billions that are invested in the competitors to all of these organizations that are going to be that 75% that gets removed. There is quite a strong competition to move us out of our complacency. So with this big motivation and every C-suite and executive interested in surviving in this environment, what can we do to help as tool providers, as partners, as agents for change? To begin with, we can continue to do the essentials that all organizations need to be able to do. So we're not going to stop being organizations. So we're going to have to continue to do the essentials. We're going to have to build shareholder value. That's how we pay for our own existence in many cases. Of course, there's lots of thought about how that is built. Customers first, for example. And there's a big push in all agile material that talks about if we do the things for the customers, then the value to the shareholders will emerge, rather than the reverse. More on that later. Clearly, competitive advantage is important. If there's $251 billion being invested to get ahead of us, how much do we have to invest to stay competitively, do product innovation, and at least keep up with the market? So the essentials of accelerating our own growth and building upon the loyal customers that we already have is key. These are the essentials that we all must do correctly. In the context of what Atlassian believes, across that three simple things, we understand that there are major trends and narratives we need to pay attention to. Of course, we know that in this history of all software, all the standard memes and messages persist today. We know that 80% of the features supposedly are rarely used. So what if we didn't build those 80%? What if we actually stopped wasting our focus and applied it to the area that would be most impactful, to those things that customers want to use? That's a tricky thing. Customers only know what they want when we give it to them. So it's always that challenge. Software is the innovation engine of the company because it is the thing that allows us to do a lot of experimentation more quickly. It is the thing that allows us to go on these digital transformations that you all put your hands up and said you're trying to do, or you're working for companies who are doing it. So building the digital DNA of the company and getting us to this point of being able to have the right sets of software, either by building or buying or by integrating, we have to be able to do all this much more quickly and more safely. We also recognize that the way that we share information across our organizations has to change. As we go on these digital transformations, more assets are available digitally. They can't be in silos, aside from my keynote, which is not accessible to anybody here today. But information should flow freely across the organizations. So we'll talk about how Atlassian has a vision for this and how it's not just the static assets that we create, but it's the entire flow of information in service of the software that we're creating that allows us to get to customer value as quickly and safely as possible. And in pursuit of this, there are a number of common challenges which we see across the market space and which I'm sure all of you are familiar with as well. There's the context of how do we scale? If we're getting to small elements of value, that's quite successful for us, but we need to get to something that's going to scale to the volume that that 250 billion of investment is getting other businesses to. So optimizing our approach to getting to scale is part of the conversation we're going to be having today. But we also need to be able to do this predictably and repeatably and safely, as the previous conversation was covering. And we need to be able to try things out quickly. We can't go slower than the competition. We have to actually move at the pace of innovation. Hence the original premise of this being agile at startup speeds. With these common challenges across all organizations, then we want to understand how Atlassian's vision of responding to these challenges, these volatility, uncertainty, the complexity, all of these things that you hear in the analysts, the consultants, and the buzzwords. So for us, we boil these things down into the idea that companies in transformation are challenged by these essential questions. And if everybody has a common set of challenges, then maybe we should be able to come up with some sort of repeatable mechanism or common set of things, tools, practices, and people with the consulting skills to address these problems in a repeatable and predictable way. So we want to ask those questions. Are we able to deliver the large initiatives that our companies have? It's a question. Can we actually do it? Yes. Can we do it at speed? Then we go back to the old questions of can we do it on budget and quality and on time? We also focus on the teams because the teams need to be able to embrace change and to follow the market, but also get ahead of it, because we know we're always trying to create that competitive advantage. And the other questions we ask are we learning fast enough? The information in the organization, if it's not tied in silos and is accessible to everybody, does that create new insights? If Atlassian is an open organization, what does that mean in terms of, aside from having a very, very large Confluence environment, what does it actually mean for the culture and the process of sharing that knowledge, of allowing someone to challenge or spar with you on something that you thought was correct, but maybe from other insights you'll get different ideas. If you embrace these questions and start to at least acknowledge that you have to get answers to these, you start to consider the aspect of your journey. You start to consider the direction that you're heading to create a connected enterprise, something that breaks down the silos, something that enables the process conversations across all of your organization. Or even take that message from Atlassian, a connected enterprise that can unleash the potential of every team. We focus on these things in service of what we've been talking about all along, delivering value faster, optimizing the flow of work that we're doing so that we're getting to maximum business value. And of course, being able to act on change. All these things are key repeatable messages that we hear. And again, we focus on these things in the context of how they together work to get us to this agility at startup speed. So we think about the first part of all of this stuff is to get to predictable delivery. If we make a commitment to our stakeholders or to the customers, if we're going to build a roadmap around serving customers faster, we need to be predictable. We can't not meet the things that we say we're going to do. So if we're going to have predictable delivery, we should be able to do that in the context of picking the right things to build. A value-driven investment process looks first at the customer and the value that we want to create. It doesn't just look at the traditional way of doing things. We spent this much money last year, so this year we must spend maybe 10 or 7% less. That's not a right way to actually operate effectively. You need to be looking at the value-driven investment side of things. And of course, you need to scale this across the rest of the organization to the point of your strategic decision-making. You need to be able to pick and choose markets quickly, get in and get out when the opportunities are there. Be aware of if we're chasing a market that has no actual value for us, that's going to be a waste of money as well. Catching up is often more expensive than getting ahead. But it's all based on a concept of shared ownership of outcomes. If we're going to unleash the potential of every team, we want to be sure that every team is invested in the success that we're trying to create. So if we're going to be digitally transforming organizations, or we're going to be focusing on these bigger things, we should have at least a minimum of a context of how we're going to get there. For Atlassian, we believe we get there with right tools, right people, right practices. And partners here in IT Economics have a nice way of putting this, that it's not just the technology. So yeah, you can buy a new tool, but if you don't know how to use it safely and securely and better than your competitors, you're not going to get the value that you want to get out of it. If your people aren't ready for working in this new way, then you're not going to have the cultural impact that you thought you were going to get. Now, Raj and Dominic will talk a lot about this stuff later today. I know Dominic has a great talk track on the ways of working and the people as a work futurist, so I do encourage you all to catch that session before you go to the after party. But for me, since I was talking about Jira Align as the primary conversation here and introducing you to a new tool that should help you do these things, I will take the next 20 or so minutes to talk about the tool itself and how we think the tool is part of this journey to a great outcome, key being a part of the journey. You don't just install the silver bullet and automatically succeed. It's a bit more difficult. Again, we open and transparent company. So when we think about these things, actually we see quite an interesting opportunity landscape open up for us. We start to see a number of different ways of talking about how we get this tool to address those questions that we called out. When we look at agile or agile at scale or waterfall or any of these ways of working, we think about, for example, how do we get those ways of working distributed across the entire organization? How do all business functions start to get connected so we can build that connected enterprise? How do they all have the silos broken down so we're freely sharing communications, freely sharing outputs and capabilities, and freely sharing the ownership across the organization? But we're also interested in scaling that up across all those leaders within the organization. So if your teams at the execution layer are doing great agile, building the thing right, that's great. If they're not building the right thing, that's less great. And if the organization is not able to articulate correctly enough or quickly enough what the right things are to build, or to run enough experiments to figure out what the right things are to build, then we're not going to be able to do that. So you need agility at all these levels. So agility at startup speed is a number of different things. We talk about the business function, obviously. We talk about all leaders, like David Marquet's material, Simon Sinek's material, all these new ways of creating leaders in an organization. We also call out the fact that your maturity of doing these things is important. On day one, if you decide to run that marathon, not a good plan. Go do those long miles. So you're going to be at a low level of ability or execution capability or maturity. You have to build up that muscle memory. It's the same with these new ways of working. SAFE, in the most recent event they held at The Hague last year, ran a simple survey and they came up with this paradigm of crawl, walk, and run. An interesting way of trying to articulate where are people in the maturity of those things that do the ways of working that you want to get to. Team level, agile, everybody's at quite an advanced maturity. At the more complicated, challenging levels of these, primarily the scale context, so going up into trains, solutions, portfolios, or whatever you call these things, less mature. More opportunity for us as change agents and as tool providers and as partners to effect change and to shorten the path to that startup agility. For Atlassian, we look at this right across this multi-dimensional opportunity landscape, and we try to think about, okay, how do we fit in the more traditional biz, dev, and ops conversations? How do we think about, well, my business is waterfall, my dev team are agile, and my ops team are following ITIL? Okay, well, how do we pull all those things together? How do you actually create that connected enterprise? And of course, since my focus is primarily on the tools, the conversation is really from these aspects of how do we create the mission, vision, and values in an articulated sense and in a tool of record or a system of record that allows us to begin positioning these larger conversations. How does that fit in the wider context of all those other Atlassian products that you all know and love so much? And even beyond that, into other products. We talk about partnerships across the various other capabilities that delivery teams have to leverage. It's great being able to manage work in Jira, but obviously your day job is using other tools as well. So connecting all of these things together across the wider narrative of that people, process, and tools is the aspect of, or essence of this whole conversation. Doing that stuff right gets you to agility at startup speed. And the big piece that we're talking about, obviously, as I keep building up to, is Jira Align. So part of what Jira Align is aiming to do is bridge all of those pieces that I've been teasing and talking about for the last while. But it's a big problem space. You know, if we were to look at going across the enterprise level, if we were to think about where would we start putting Jira or Jira Align across this context? Where would we start to think about the tools across these contexts? And what tools are they? So the primary conversation for us is to understand positioning in this opportunity landscape, understanding where we want to go after those things that your customers want to do, and do that in connection with the best-in-class products for work management. So how AgileCraft became Jira Align and works closely with these things is the focus of Atlassian for at least the next number of years. And you're going to see increasing numbers of messages from colleagues like Keane down here, talking at the team tour events, and also at Summit as we begin to share more about what it means in this sense. But specifically in Jira Align. So the context for Jira Align that we think about in many ways is how do we help empower all of these teams? How do we give the right set of tools, the right set of visibility to all of the organizational leaders and execution teams. So we offer various parts of the product to go across all those different teams. One of the core premises of being predictable is that we make all work visible. And the culture of openness means that we want to make all work visible in service of making the right choices. Again, breaking down the silos means making work visible, but it has to be aligned to the purpose of the business. We can't unleash the potential of teams to do what they want. We unleash the potential of teams in service of delivering better things to customers. So aligning the work to the purpose of our organization is key. Seeing that alignment, having it visible, is key. And it all comes back to optimizing those shared outcomes. So I've always been building up, not actually delivering any outcome. When we think about all those teams and we think about where we want to actually affect change, we know that agility has been super successful down here. The delivery teams and increasingly the IT operations teams are able to run the technology, change the technology much more quickly, predictably, and safely. What we figure is that the business intent, the strategic shifts, and all of the ideas that should be flowing down across the organization so these teams are having shared ownership of that work, that's the bit that's not working quite so well. And of course, the up direction, the feedback or the uplink to the leadership is also a bit immature and a bit heavily focused on manual intervention, heavily focused on lagging indicators, data that was maybe 3 or 6 months old. So we're focusing in Jira Align on how we can get maximal information to the teams who are working in Jira, Jira Service Desk, Trello, etc. But do that in service of the decision makers right across the rest of the organization, so that we're getting the right strategic set, mapped and aligned with the way we want to break this down. So we're descaling the big decisions the leaders are making into things that teams can actually affect, but at the same time, remembering the agile concept that fast feedback. If the teams find out that this is not the right thing to do, don't just keep spending the rest of the budget because that's what the plan said. Make a choice, pivot, decide to do something else, reallocate the budget, reflow things. Now, of course, this is a huge set of things, a massive buffet that we couldn't hope to eat in the next 15 or less minutes. So I'm going to focus in on just one section. Often the first level of scale, the first level of getting to this startup speed is with this community, this new emerging group of people who are trying to be more agile, who are trying to be like the multiples of teams that they're trying to coordinate. And of course, these people, their jobs are quite diverse, quite broad. So I'm going to focus down a little more, and I'm going to pick 3. I'm going to cherry pick the nice ones, the ones that we think are having maximal impact and value for those customers who are going on this agility at startup speed journey. One of the first, one of the first things that a lot of organizations face is the idea of how do I do a bigger plan? How do I take my sprint planning, now do that for 5, 15, 20 teams? Anybody ever participated in a PI planning event? A little less than half the room. So PI planning is this big quarterly, often, planning event where the teams get together and they try to share the planning process. They try to create a shared ownership of the outcome. They then get all their stories distributed across Jira, and they get all of the Jira epics distributed across the various sprints by which we should be demonstrating working software. The idea of creating a plan that takes multiple sprints worth of data, so here's sprint 24, but also overlaid with here's each of the teams who are doing work within sprint 24. How can we plan this huge amount of work? 3 months worth of work, 5 or 6 sprints across 5 or 6 teams. This is actually quite easy to do in Jira Align. And it's focused on helping us make those quick decisions about what are those things that will get us to the outcomes more safely, more quickly, more predictably. So PI planning is a great ceremony to begin adopting, and it is really nicely enabled. Of course, I have to say that because I'm from Jira Align. So it's nicely enabled in Jira Align, but the other part of planning is execution. If you create a perfect plan, that's a lovely piece of wall art, that's great. If you can't execute to that plan, if you can't meaningfully get to the outcomes that you're supposed to get to, that's not so great. Any plan, as it starts out, is a nice artistic endeavor. But what we want to get to is the seamless execution of that plan. So how does Sprint 23, 24, 25, 26 easily flow up to us from Jira after that 2-day planning event? After we've created this great vision of where we want to get to, how do we steer safely towards it? How do we orchestrate? How do we coordinate? How do we enable? Use all those nice agile words. Don't say manage. Don't say command and control. So these are, yes, lagging indicators because they're based on the data that's coming up to us from Jira, but they are about a minute old. They're not manually processed through Excel sheets and various other visualizations. This is fresh data coming to us from Jira. These progress bars actually tell the real story. This thing is actually behind schedule. This is giving us stuff that is actionable. It enables us to make decisions and try to help us get to the outcome as safely and quickly as possible. But we also think about how do we visualize the outcome. Anybody know OKRs? What does it mean? More than half the room. Objectives, key results. So Google's had great success with reinvigorating interest in this well-established concept. So if we're going to set that outcome, we're going to define the objective we want to get to. We're going to make it so that we can ladder these outcomes across all the various levels of the organization who are going to participate in delivering this. We're going to track the way that we get to the key result, the measurement of are we on track? Are we actually succeeding with this outcome? Or do we have some difficult business decisions to make? So often these OKRs are expressed in PowerPoints or Confluence pages or in Excel sheets. They're tricky to track down, and because they're not connected to the real work, it becomes a problem. These objectives can be connected directly to the Jira epics or Jira stories, thereby allowing the progress of doing the work to let us know when we can start measuring the outcome that that work was supposed to enable. So objectives and key results, I think, are a key part of this overall planning narrative and execution narrative. Getting to this at the right levels of scale across the rest of the scale of the organization is key for this agility at startup speed stuff. But it's not the end of the story. There are many other bits and pieces that help us and empower teams, make all work visible, and align work to the purpose of the organization. I, of course, can't cover all these things, but I do encourage you to find us on Atlassian.com and other places to continue these investigations with us. But we also recognize that these tools exist in a much bigger ecosystem. If you're looking across organizations, you often very quickly get to that question about, okay, how much does the dev team cost us? Can the customer or voice the customer steer the flow of the dev team? So is finance wagging the delivery dog? Is the customer wagging the delivery dog? What about the whole HR conversation? How do the teams own their own HR processes? Or how does all this work management stuff fit in this bigger context of a business operating system? So Atlassian believes that work management or work coordination or just work in general is the next system of record that is going to be part of your business operating systems. No longer will we be just throwing work into this black hole of not knowing where it is or when it's coming out or how much it costs. It needs to seamlessly connect to and operate in service of these extra levels of decision making within the organization. So within Jira Align particularly, we are working on aligning our outcomes in service of those other systems. How do those objectives get their key results from the finance systems, like or from the customer systems, net promoter scores? Are those objectives having the impact that they should have, and can we track that easily? We're also thinking about the seamless collaboration. How does the funding cycle drive the planning cycle? How do we break down and get to things that Beyond Budgeting really wants us to get to, which is continuous planning or rolling wave planning? Well, you do it by connecting all the tools, connecting all the process, connecting all the people. Those three things, again, that's what we're focusing on. A business operating capability. But I'm pretty much out of time, and I want to encourage you to continue the conversation with us. I cherry-picked again 3 things that might help with you continuing that conversation. First one there, obviously, is the Atlassian.com website. A new one for me, obviously, at Atlassian in only 10 months. And we would encourage you to go out and look at not just the tools, but also the ways of working, which Dominic will talk about later today. So looking at those playbooks and starting to ask those bigger questions will help you get a better sense of how people, process, and tools will be part of your conversations going forward. And how partners like IT Economics with similar mindsets will help you accelerate those processes. Coming up in March, ably delivered by my colleague here, Joachim, in front of the room, will be the team tour events right across Europe, right across the world. Two in particular of interest, Cologne and Munich, if you want to see these slides again. Yeah, it's always fun. We'll make them different next time. Anybody going to Summit? Anybody know what Summit is? Anybody want to go? It's Vegas, baby. So the context here is that we are continuing to ask customers, prospects, partners, all of you, where are you on your agile at startup speed journey? Where can we leverage our tools, practices, and people to help you get there more quickly or influence the bits that we need to do slightly differently? So I have been Peter Keane. I suppose I still am. And I work in the solutions engineering space for Atlassian, and I'd be very open to having more conversations.